On the morning Margaret Lewis turned 64, she stood in her kitchen in a quiet Portland suburb, holding a cup of coffee that had already gone cold, watching her husband Thomas read the news on his tablet without looking at her. And in that still moment she felt something heavy settle in her chest, not anger or sadness exactly, but the clear understanding that she no longer felt present in her own marriage, a realization that did not come suddenly but had been forming for years through missed conversations, forgotten glances, and evenings spent sitting side by side without truly being together. They had been married for 40 years, raised 2 children, built careers, survived financial stress and health scares, and shared more memories than most couples ever do, yet now their days moved forward on parallel tracks that never touched, with Thomas retired and absorbed in routines that did not include her and Margaret quietly managing the home, volunteering, and filling her time with tasks that kept her busy but never fulfilled. And although neighbors admired them as a steady couple who waved politely and attended events together, no one saw the silence growing between them like a wall built brick by brick. Margaret remembered when Thomas used to ask about her thoughts, when he noticed small changes, when laughter filled the house, but those moments had faded so slowly that she almost blamed herself for missing them, telling herself that long marriages naturally settle into calm habits, that comfort replaces passion, that this was simply what life looked like after 60, yet deep inside she knew the calm was not peace but absence. And on that birthday, and Thomas, the evenings spent together without words, the meals eaten in silence, the unasked questions, and she realized that what hurt most wasn't betrayal in the dramatic sense but the emotional distance that had been growing for years, the way Thomas had stopped noticing her, stopped sharing himself, stopped making her feel like the person he had chosen 40 years ago. And one afternoon, while Thomas was in the garden trimming the roses, Margaret sat in the living room and opened his tablet, hesitant but needing clarity, and there it was again, more messages from Elaine, simple phrases, friendly and light, but they revealed a connection that Thomas had kept private, conversations that were intimate in ways Margaret had been denied. Not physical but emotional, a bond that allowed him to feel seen, heard, and appreciated, things she had once given freely but that had faded as life and routine had taken over. And when Thomas returned, she confronted him with calm precision, showing him the messages, asking what they meant, needing honesty more than anger, and he admitted that he had enjoyed talking to Elaine, that he felt alive again in small ways, that she had listened to him when he thought no one else cared, and as he spoke, his voice trembled slightly, not with guilt alone but with the realization that he had drifted from the woman who had built his life, the woman who had been patient, supportive, and loving through decades of work, children, and shared struggles. And Margaret listened with a mix of sadness and understanding, recognizing that love can exist in many forms but that the neglect of one partner can lead to spaces being filled elsewhere, that human hearts are complicated, and that what she felt, pain, loss, and quiet betrayal, was not born from drama but from being overlooked, from seeing the man she had married seek validation outside their marriage. And over the next few weeks, they spoke in measured tones, acknowledging the fractures, remembering the good times, and realizing that despite decades together, the emotional wounds were deep, that forgiveness alone could not rebuild a connection that had silently slipped away, and they both came to a mutual, painful understanding that the marriage as it was could no longer continue, that a gray divorce, quiet, dignified, and unmarked by conflict, was the only path that respected the love they had once shared while acknowledging the distance that had grown. And as Margaret packed her belongings and Thomas watched, the weight of 40 years compressed into boxes and memories, they felt the sharp sting of endings without anger, the sorrow of love quietly unraveling, and the bittersweet truth settled into the air between them, that some separations are not explosive but silent, marked by sadness, regret, and the gentle acknowledgement that even the deepest love can falter when hearts stop fully showing up for each other. Margaret moved into a small, sunlit apartment near the Oregon coast, carrying only what she truly needed, and for the first time in decades, the space felt like it belonged entirely to her, quiet but full of possibility, and she discovered how strange it was to live without Thomas's presence, to wake up without the familiar sounds of his routines, to cook meals that were no longer shared, and at first, the loneliness pressed heavily, a reminder of the life she had lost, yet over time, she began to feel something she had almost forgotten: of freedom, the subtle joy of deciding her own days, taking walks along the ocean, watching waves crash and listening to the gulls call, feeling the cold breeze on her face and realizing that life could still hold beauty outside the framework of her marriage. She joined a local book club, met neighbors at the farmer's market, laughed at small jokes, shared her thoughts freely, and found that her voice, once drowned by the routines of decades, could now speak for itself without apology or hesitation, and every evening she returned to her apartment with a sense of quiet accomplishment, filling her hours with reading, gardening on her balcony, and connecting with friends who reminded her that she was not alone. Thomas, meanwhile, remained in the house they had shared for 40 years, now echoing with emptiness, and he felt the weight of silence in ways he had never imagined, realizing that the daily habits, the small conversations, the comfort of shared meals and morning coffee, were what he had truly missed, and as Elaine drifted away, her interest waning once secrecy and novelty faded, he saw that the life he thought he wanted, filled with emotional excitement outside the marriage, could not replace the steady presence of someone who had known him through all his years, who had laughed with him, cried with him, and stood by him through challenges. He walked the rooms they had filled together, touched the objects of their shared past, photographs, anniversary cards, a vase from their early days of marriage, and a quiet regret settled deep inside him, a longing for the emotional closeness he had abandoned. And one evening, as he picked up an old card Margaret had written, ending with the words, "No matter what, I choose you," the weight of his choices hit him fully, tears forming as he realized that love without presence, attention, and care is fragile, and that even after 40 years, the consequences of emotional neglect could not be undone. While Margaret, unaware of the depth of his regret, walked along the beach, feeling both the sting of loss and the thrill of reclaiming her life, learning to cherish her own needs, desires, and voice, discovering that endings can hurt but also open doors to self-discovery, that the love she had shared with Thomas had shaped her but did not define her entirely. And as days turned into weeks, the rhythm of life outside their marriage became her new reality, one of both sorrow and empowerment, while Thomas, alone in the house, began to understand that some lessons come too late, that people can grieve not just loss but their own choices, and that in the silence of an empty home, the heart remembers what it took for granted, and both of them, moving through separate lives, felt the undeniable truth that love, even when real and lasting, requires constant care, presence, and attention, and that without it, even decades together could not prevent the quiet unraveling of a shared life. Months after the divorce, Thomas could not escape the emptiness that had settled into his days, the house that had once been filled with laughter, shared routines, and the subtle warmth of Margaret's presence now felt too large, too quiet, each room echoing with memories he could no longer reach, and he realized that the brief connection he had sought with Elaine had never filled the void, that the emotional bond he had lost with Margaret was irreplaceable, and each morning as he made coffee or walked through the garden, he saw traces of her everywhere, the flowers she had planted, the notes she had left, the careful order of things that spoke of her care and attention, and he felt the sharp ache of regret, the understanding that he had not just lost a wife but a partner, a confidant, and a lifelong friend, and that no apology or explanation could undo the years of distance he had allowed to grow. Finally, unable to carry the weight alone, he reached out to Margaret, asking if she would meet him for a conversation, and though she was cautious, she agreed, curious about his state and perhaps needing to witness his acknowledgement of their shared past. And when they met at a quiet cafe, the air between them was tense yet familiar, carrying decades of love, routine, and now sorrow, and Thomas began to speak, his voice trembling as he admitted his mistakes, his emotional absence, his failure to show up fully in the life they had built together, and Margaret listened silently, feeling a mixture of empathy and resolve, understanding that his tears were sincere but that her choice to separate had been made with clarity and care for herself, that love alone could not heal what had been neglected for so long. And as Thomas continued, describing his longing for the small moments she had once given freely, the way she laughed, the way she reminded him to take care of himself, the comfort of her presence, Margaret felt the bittersweet tug of memories, knowing that while the love between them had been real, it could no longer anchor them in the present. They spoke for hours, revisiting their history, acknowledging joys and mistakes, and though there was no rekindling of romance, there was a gentle closure, a mutual understanding that life could continue separately with respect and honesty, that regret can be powerful but cannot always rewrite the past, and as they said their final goodbyes outside the cafe, Thomas wiped tears from his eyes while Margaret walked away with a quiet strength, knowing she had chosen herself after 40 years of love, that some endings carry sorrow yet also freedom, and that sometimes the bravest act of love is letting go while carrying the lessons, memories, and compassion for a life once shared, leaving both with the quiet hope that even in regret, healing and growth are possible.